The galaxy had known humanity for 80 years, and in all that time, it had never once feared them. Humans were the young ones, the newcomers who arrived at the galactic table with wide eyes and open hands, eager to trade, eager to learn, eager to prove they belonged among the stars. And the elder species had smiled at them, the way one smiles at a child trying to sit with the adults. Admiral Serafina Okonkwo stood in the great hall of the Galactic Concord, on the neutral world of Tyrellus, and felt that same condescension pressing down on her like gravity. The chamber was enormous, built for species that had ruled the stars for tens of thousands of years, and she was just a human, a representative of a civilization that had only recently stopped killing itself over patches of dirt on a single blue world. But Sarah had not come to be impressed. She had come to warn them. The Valith Dominion has violated 17 border agreements in the last standard year alone, she said, her voice steady and clear as it echoed through the chamber. They have moved warships into neutral corridors and displaced 3 smaller species from their home systems. This is not expansion, honored delegates. This is conquest. The chamber murmured. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but most of them simply watched with polite disinterest. Then Archon Draven Sulcathor stood. He was tall, nearly 3 meters of scaled muscle and gleaming black armor, the ruler of the most powerful military empire in the known galaxy. His golden eyes swept across the chamber with the lazy confidence of a predator who had never been challenged, and when they landed on Sarah, they narrowed with amusement. "Your kind still smells of the mud you crawled from," he said, and a ripple of nervous laughter moved through the delegates. "Sit down, little world. The affairs of empires are not your concern." Sarah held his gaze. She did not flinch, did not blink, did not look away. Something cold moved behind her dark brown eyes, something ancient and patient, and very, very dangerous. But she said nothing. She simply returned to her seat, because she was a diplomat, and diplomats exercised restraint. She would remember that restraint later, and wonder if it had cost her everything. The summit continued for 2 more hours. Trade agreements were discussed, territorial disputes were politely tabled, and the Valith Dominion's aggression was officially classified as a matter requiring further observation. Sarah sat through all of it, with her jaw tight and her hands folded in her lap. Then her communicator buzzed, a priority alert, the kind that only came when something had gone terribly wrong. She looked down at the screen, and the world stopped. Haven Station, humanity's crown jewel, a massive orbital colony above Mars that housed 4,200,000 civilians, was under attack. 300 Valith warships had decloaked without warning and opened fire on a station full of families, researchers, children, and elderly who had retired to watch the red planet turn beneath them. The feed came through in real time. Sarah watched on the small screen in her hand as plasma fire tore through Haven's outer ring. She saw bulkheads melt and corridors collapse. She heard the screams. Thousands of voices crying out at once. Parents calling for their children. Children calling for their parents. She saw a little girl running through a burning hallway, clutching a stuffed animal. And for one terrible moment, the girl looked directly into the camera, before the ceiling came down. The whole attack lasted less than 40 minutes. When it was over, 3,700,000 people were dead, burned, suffocated, or blown into the cold vacuum of space. The Concord chamber had gone silent. Every delegate had received the same feed. Every eye in the room turned to Sarah. And across the chamber, Archon Draven Sulcathor smiled. It was a small smile, satisfied, confident. The smile of someone who believed he had just removed a nuisance from the board. He had struck at humanity's heart, and expected submission, expected tears, expected a broken species to come crawling to the Concord, begging for help. What he got instead was silence. Sarah stood. Her hands were steady, her eyes were dry, Her face held no expression at all, and that absence of emotion was more frightening than any scream could have been. She looked at Dravon, and spoke in a voice that was quiet and calm, and carried to every corner of the enormous chamber. "You will regret this for as long as your species exists," she said. "And I will make sure your species exists long enough to remember." Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, every single human delegate rose from their seats and followed without a word. The doors closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid falling shut. No one in the chamber spoke for a very long time. Across human space, the news spread at the speed of light. On Earth, billions watched the footage from Haven. The fire, the screams, the tiny bodies floating in the wreckage. On Mars, colonists stood in the red dust and stared at the sky, where Haven had once been a bright point of light, and saw only darkness. On Luna, veterans who had not worn a uniform in decades felt something old and terrible wake up inside their chests. There was no panic. That was what surprised the galaxy most. There was no rioting, no chaos, no mass hysteria. Instead, there was a silence that spread across every human world like frost across glass, deep, cold, and absolute. And then humanity began to move. It started in the shipyards of Jupiter, where workers who had been building cargo vessels quietly switched their production lines without being ordered to. It spread to the factories of Earth, where automated forges that had not produced weapons since the resource wars of the 22nd century began to glow with heat again. It reached the universities, where physicists and engineers who had spent their careers studying black holes and quantum fields walked into military research centers and offered everything they knew. Retired soldiers reported to their old bases without receiving any call. Civilian pilots volunteered by the hundreds of thousands. Teachers, farmers, miners, and artists, people who had never held a weapon in their lives, lined up at recruitment centers and said the same thing over and over again. "Tell me where to go." No government ordered this. No leader gave a speech that sparked it. It simply happened, the way a heartbeat happens, automatic, involuntary, and unstoppable. Humanity had been wounded in its deepest place, and every single human being alive felt it at the same moment, and every single one of them made the same choice. Sarah arrived at the Bastion, Earth's supreme military command center, buried deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, and found the Joint Chiefs already assembled. They stood when she entered, and she saw in their faces the same cold fire she felt in her own chest. She did not waste time with speeches. She did not ask for opinions. She looked at the men and women who commanded humanity's military, and gave an order that would change the galaxy forever. "Total mobilization," she said. "Every shipyard, every factory, every mind, every hand. We go to war." No one questioned her. No one hesitated. The room moved. Somewhere out in the black between the stars, Archon Draven sat on the bridge of his flagship and poured himself a drink to celebrate his easy victory. He had no idea what was coming. He had poked a sleeping wolf and mistaken its silence for death, but the wolf was not dead. It was waking up, and it was very, very hungry. 3 months after the burning of Haven, the galaxy began to notice something strange happening in human space, and it terrified them. The Galactic Concord's Intelligence Division had been monitoring Earth's activity since the attack, expecting to see a grieving civilization slowly rebuilding its defenses. What they saw instead made their senior analysts request verification 3 times, because they were certain their instruments were broken. Earth's industrial output had increased by 9,000% in 90 days. That number was not a mistake. It was not an exaggeration. It was the cold, mathematical truth, and it was a number that no civilization in the recorded history of the galaxy had ever achieved. Not the Valith at the height of their expansion, not the Thyrolans during their ancient golden age, not any species in any era. Humanity had done it in 3 months. and they showed no signs of slowing down. Every orbital shipyard around Jupiter, Saturn, and Earth was running at full capacity, turning out warships at a pace that defied explanation. Civilian factories had been converted overnight. Places that once manufactured farming equipment now produced missile guidance systems. Laboratories that once studied coral reef restoration now designed weapons that could crack a planet's crust. The entire economic and scientific engine of human civilization had pivoted toward a single purpose, with a speed and coordination that should have been impossible for a species that could not even agree on a single language. But war had always been humanity's oldest talent, and they had simply remembered how to use it. On the frozen moon of Europa, beneath the ice, a massive research facility called the Deep Forge worked around the clock on 3 projects that would change the shape of the war. Project Fenrir produced a new class of dreadnought, ships twice the size of any Valith capital vessel, armed with kinetic accelerators that could fire tungsten slugs at 12% of the speed of light. A single shot from a Fenrir cannon could punch through any known shield and split a battlecruiser in half. Project Aegis created an adaptive energy shield reverse-engineered from captured Valith technology, but humanity had not simply copied it. They had improved it in ways the Valith had never imagined, designing shields that could absorb incoming energy fire and redirect it back at the attacker. Project Whisper built stealth corvettes equipped with quantum phase cloaking. These small, fast ships were invisible to every sensor array in the galaxy, and they could slip behind enemy lines like ghosts in the dark. The engineers who built these weapons worked 16-hour shifts and slept on cots beside their machines. They ate when they remembered and showered when someone reminded them. Many of them had lost family on Haven, and they poured their grief into every weld, every circuit, every line of code. They were not just building weapons. They were building a promise that Haven would be answered. Across the galaxy, the elder species watched with growing unease. The Thyrolans, an ancient and wise civilization that had studied humanity since first contact, sent a private message to the Concord that was later leaked to every major news network in known space. "We have observed humanity for decades," the message read. "We warned you. They are not like us. They do not forget. They do not forgive. And they do not lose. You should have listened." On the Valith homeworld of Vaelthar, Archon Draven Sulcathor sat in his war room and dismissed the reports with a wave of his clawed hand. "They are insects building bigger nests," he said to his advisors. "It changes nothing. Let them build their little ships. They will shatter against our fleets like glass against stone." But not everyone in his command shared his confidence. Admiral Talith Vor, his most senior military officer, had spent years studying human history, and what she had found kept her awake at night. She requested a private audience with the Archon, and when they were alone, she spoke with a directness that bordered on dangerous. "Archon, I have studied their world wars," she said. "In the span of 30 years, they fought 2 conflicts that killed over 100 million of their own kind. Not aliens, not enemies from another world, their own species. They invented weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash, and then built enough of them to end all life on their planet several times over." Draven stared at her. "Every weapon they possess," Talith continued, "was originally designed to kill other humans. They did not evolve in competition with another species. They are the most practiced killers in this galaxy, and you have just given them a reason to point all of that practice at us." Draven's golden eyes narrowed. "Are you afraid, Admiral?" "I am informed," she replied. "There is a difference." He dismissed her. She saluted and left, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, even if Draven's pride would never let them grow. Meanwhile, on the dark side of Earth's moon, Admiral Serafina Okonkwo stood before a memorial wall that stretched for kilometers, a wall of holographic images showing the face of every person who had died on Haven Station. 4,200,000 faces glowed softly in the lunar darkness, each one tagged with a name, an age, and a single sentence about who they had been. Sarah walked along the wall in silence, her boots clicking on the polished floor. She passed scientists and teachers and children and grandparents and newborns who had lived only a few days before the fire took them. Then she stopped. A small face looked back at her from the wall, a girl with dark skin and bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile that could light up any room she walked into. Amara Okonkwo, age 9, daughter of Sarah's brother David, who had loved butterflies and bad jokes, and had once told her aunt that she wanted to be the first human to talk to a star. Sarah stood there for a long time. She reached out and touched the holographic image, and her fingers passed through the light, as if through a ghost. She did not cry. She had not cried since Haven, and she was not sure she remembered how. The grief had gone somewhere deep inside her and hardened into something else, something cold and sharp and patient, like a blade being forged in a furnace that would never go out. "I am coming, baby," she whispered. "I promise." Then she turned and walked back toward the command center, and anyone who saw her face in that moment looked away quickly, because there was something in her eyes that was too large and too terrible to meet directly. Days later, something unexpected happened. Signals began arriving from the edges of Vaylith space. Small species, conquered peoples, civilizations that had been crushed under the Dominion's boot for centuries, reached out to Earth in secret. The Relici, brilliant engineers whose homeworld had been occupied for 200 years, offered technical expertise and shipyard access. The Orani, aquatic beings with the finest intelligence network in the galaxy, offered spy networks embedded deep within Vaylith territory. Sarah met with their representatives in a secure channel and listened to their offers. When they finished, she gave them a simple answer. "We accept your help, not because we need it, but because you deserve to be part of what comes next. And when this war is over, no one will conquer you again. You have Earth's word, and Earth keeps its word." The Relici ambassador, an old engineer with scars on his hands from decades of forced labor, looked at Sarah through the screen and said something that would be repeated across 100 worlds. "For the first time in my life, I believe someone who says that." The day finally came. Earth's first expeditionary fleet, 400 warships, the largest human fleet ever assembled, launched from the orbital shipyards of Jupiter in perfect formation. Fenrir dreadnoughts led the way, their massive hulls bristling with weapons that had never been fired in anger. Whisper corvettes flickered at the edges of the formation like shadows, and at the center, the flagship UES Retribution carried Admiral Okonkwo toward the stars. Sarah stood on the bridge and opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. "They burned Haven because they thought we were soft," she said. "They thought peace meant we had forgotten how to fight. Today we remind the galaxy what humanity is. Not the poets, not the diplomats, the wolves." 400 ships entered slipspace at the same moment. The stars stretched into long white lines and then vanished, and the fleet disappeared into the dark. Somewhere ahead of them, the Vaylith Dominion waited, confident, proud, and completely unaware that the most dangerous species in the galaxy was coming for them, with fire in its belly and fury in its heart. The wolves were loose, and they were hunting. The Vaylith fleet at Korath Nebula numbered 500 warships, the largest forward strike force the Dominion had ever assembled in a single location. They were positioned in a defensive sphere formation, bristling with plasma cannons and torpedo arrays, ready to launch a second wave of attacks against Earth's outer colonies. Their commander, Fleet Marshal Sirac, was confident. He had spent 30 years conquering lesser species and had never lost a major engagement. His ships were battle-tested, his crews were disciplined, and his orders from Archon Dravon were simple. crush whatever pathetic fleet the humans managed to scrape together, and push toward Earth itself. He expected the humans to come straight at him, the way every young species did, reckless, emotional, and easy to destroy. He was wrong about everything. The first sign that something was different came when his communications officer reported a minor anomaly. A slight fluctuation in the sensor grid, barely noticeable, like a moth brushing against a window. Sirac dismissed it as cosmic interference and returned to his tactical display. He did not know that 12 Whisper corvettes had already slipped past his entire defense perimeter. The stealth ships moved like ghosts through the nebulous thick clouds of gas and dust. Their quantum phase cloaking made them invisible to every sensor the Valith possessed, and their crews operated in total silence, communicating only through encrypted light pulses. One by one, they reached the Valith communication relays, the massive orbital towers that allowed the fleet to coordinate across the vastness of the nebula, and attached quantum disruptors to their power cores. They did not destroy the relays. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they set the disruptors to activate simultaneously on a single signal. Then they pulled back into the darkness and waited. Admiral Okonkwo sat on the bridge of the Retribution and studied the tactical display with calm, focused eyes. Her staff moved around her in precise silence, each person performing their role with the kind of quiet efficiency that comes from absolute trust in their commander. "Whisper teams report ready," her communications officer said. "Acknowledged," Sarah replied. She looked at the display one more time. 500 enemy ships arranged in a perfect sphere, every angle covered, every approach defended. It was a textbook formation, the kind taught in every military academy in the galaxy. And that was exactly why it was going to fail. "Activate the disruptors," she said. 300 light seconds away, the quantum disruptors fired simultaneously. Every Valith communication relay in the nebula went dark at the same instant. 500 warships suddenly found themselves blind, deaf, and completely unable to coordinate. Fleet Marshal Sirac's bridge erupted in chaos. Officers shouted over each other as screens went blank and sensor feeds dissolved into static. For 30 critical seconds, no one in the Valith fleet knew where anyone else was, what they were doing, or what was happening. That was all the time Sarah needed. "All ships, execute Crescent Strike," she ordered. The human fleet dropped out of slip space in a perfect curved formation, a crescent of 400 warships that appeared on the Valith's exposed flank like a blade sweeping out of the darkness. The Fenrir dreadnoughts opened fire first, their kinetic accelerators sending tungsten slugs screaming across the void at 12% of the speed of light. The first salvo hit the Valith formation before they even knew the humans had arrived. Ships exploded, shields shattered, hull plating melted and tore apart under the impact of projectiles, traveling at speeds the Valith had never encountered in combat. The kinetic rounds punched through capital ships like needles through cloth, entering on one side and exiting the other in a spray of fire and debris. Without communications, the Valith could not organize a coordinated response. Individual captains tried to fight back, but they were shooting blind, unable to distinguish friend from foe in the chaos. Some ships fired on their own allies, others tried to flee and crashed into each other in the dense nebula. Sarah watched the battle unfold on her display and made adjustments in real time, redirecting fire here, shifting formations there, exploiting every gap and weakness with a precision that was almost surgical. She did not scream orders or pound her fist on the console. She spoke quietly, calmly, and every word she said turned into destruction. The Battle of Korath Nebula lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 340 Valith warships had been destroyed or disabled. Earth's losses were 12 ships. The surviving Valith commanders sent panicked, fragmented distress calls on whatever backup frequencies they could find. Intelligence officers who intercepted these signals later reported that one word appeared in almost every transmission: impossible. But Sarah was not finished. While the main fleet secured Korath, she detached a task force of 60 ships and sent them to the Relici homeworld, a planet that had been under Valith occupation for 2 centuries. The Relici people, the brilliant engineers who had secretly offered their help to Earth, were still living under the boot of a Valith garrison 200,000 soldiers strong. The liberation of Relici Prime began at dawn, local time. Human dropships descended through the atmosphere in waves, carrying Marines in Titan exosuits, 3-meter-tall powered armor that turned each soldier into a walking siege engine. The suits carried heavy weapons, energy shields, and enough firepower to level a building, but they also carried medical supplies, water purifiers, and emergency food rations, because the humans had not come just to fight. They had come to help. The Valith garrison was dug in deep, with fortified positions across every major city. They expected a prolonged siege, a grinding battle that would last months and give the Dominion time to send reinforcements. Instead, they got 72 hours of the most intense, precise, and overwhelming ground combat any of them had ever experienced. The Titan Marines moved through the cities like armored giants, clearing Valith positions block by block. They did not bomb from orbit. Instead, they went in on foot, door by door, fighting at close range to protect the Relici people who were trapped in the crossfire. A young Marine named Corporal Elena Vasquez carried a wounded Relici child out of a burning building, while enemy fire sparked off her suit's shields. When she reached safety, she set the child down gently, checked for injuries, and handed the child a protein bar before turning around and running back into the fight. Stories like this spread across the planet within hours. The Relici, who had lived under occupation for so long that many of them had forgotten what freedom felt like, watched in astonishment as these strange, small, impossibly brave creatures from a distant blue world fought and bled and died to set them free. When the last Valith garrison surrendered, the Relici emerged from their shelters and hiding places to find human soldiers standing in the rubble, handing out food and medical supplies and smiling tired, dusty smiles. An old Relici elder, a woman who had been born under occupation and had never known a single day of freedom, approached a young human Marine and looked up at him with eyes full of something she could not name. "Why?" she asked. "You owe us nothing." The Marine looked down at her. He was exhausted, his armor was scorched, and there was blood on his face that was not his own. He shrugged and gave her an answer that would be carved into a monument on Relici Prime and remembered for 1,000 years. "Someone hurt you," he said. "That is enough." The elder stared at him for a long moment, and then she did something that no Relici had done in the presence of an outsider in over 200 years. She reached out and took his hand, and she wept. Back on Vaelthar, the reports from Korath and Relici Prime hit the Dominion's command structure like a hammer. Archon Draven raged through his war room, smashing displays and screaming at his officers, demanding to know how a species that had been part of the galactic community for less than a century had just dismantled his finest fleet in 6 hours. Admiral Talith Vor stood in the corner and watched him with quiet, resigned eyes. When he finally stopped and turned to her, she spoke the truth that no one else dared to say. "Their tactics adapt in real time," she said. "Every engagement teaches them something new. They are not fighting the way they fought last week. They are fighting the way they will need to fight next week. They learn faster than we can respond, Archon. They are evolving while we stand still." Draven stared at her with something that might have been fear, but his pride crushed it down before it could take root. "Then we will make them pay for every step they take," he snarled. "Activate the Ashenvale line, full defensive consolidation." Talith saluted and left, but she knew in her bones that it would not be enough. She had read human history. She knew what they had done to themselves during their world wars, their genocides, their nuclear terrors. She knew that this species did not stop when it was winning. It stopped when its enemy could never threaten it again. And the Veilith were very, very far from that point. In the Concord chambers on Tyrellis, the elder species held an emergency session. The Thirolin representative stood and addressed the assembly with a gravity that silenced every voice in the room. "We told you," she said. "Humanity is not a young species playing its civilization. They are a predator species that chose to be kind. You made them choose differently, and now you will all see what that choice looks like." No one argued. No one could. On the bridge of the Retribution, Sarah sat alone in her quarters after the victories at Korath and Relici Prime. The lights were dim, and the hum of the ship's engines was the only sound. She opened a small data tablet, a personal recording of Amara, taken 2 weeks before Haven. The little girl was laughing, spinning in circles in a garden on the station, chasing a butterfly that kept landing on her nose. Sarah watched the recording once. Then she closed it, set it down, and stood. She walked to the bridge, where her officers straightened at her arrival. "Set course for the Veilith Inner Territories," she said. Her voice was steady and cold, and carried the weight of 3,700,000 ghosts. Phase 2 begins now. The Ashen Veil line was supposed to be unbreakable. It stretched across 3 star systems, a wall of 2,000 warships, orbital fortresses the size of small moons, and minefields so dense that a single ship could not pass through without being torn to pieces. The Veilith had spent decades building it as the final defense of their sovereign territory. And every military analyst in the galaxy, Veilith, Concord, or otherwise, had declared it impenetrable. Sarah studied it for 6 hours. She sat in the tactical center of the Retribution, surrounded by holographic projections of the line's every ship, every fortress, every minefield. Her eyes moved across the data with the focused patience of a surgeon studying a body before making the first cut. Her officers brought her coffee that she forgot to drink and food that she forgot to eat, and they left her alone because they had learned that when their admiral went quiet, something devastating was being born inside her mind. After 6 hours, she smiled. It was a small, sharp smile, the first her staff had seen since Haven, and it made the temperature on the bridge seem to drop by several degrees. "I see it," she said softly. Then she stood and called her senior officers to the war table. The plan was elegant in its brutality. 3 prongs, each designed to exploit a different weakness in the Veilith's perfect wall. The first prong sent Whisper corvettes deep behind the Ashen Veil line, under quantum cloak. Their mission was to infiltrate the orbital fortresses and plant charges on their primary power cores, not to destroy them immediately, but to cripple them at exactly the right moment. The second prong dispatched 200 ships under Vice Admiral Chen to engage the Veilith left flank in what appeared to be a full-scale assault. In reality, it was a feint, a loud, violent distraction designed to pull the Dominion's reserve forces out of position. The third prong was Sarah herself. While the enemy's attention was split and their fortresses went dark, she would lead the main fleet, 600 warships, including every Fenrir dreadnought humanity had built, straight through the weakened center of the line, like a spear through a cracked shield. The operation began at midnight, Galactic Standard Time. The Whisper teams moved first, slipping through the line like water through cracks in stone. They reached the fortresses and planted their charges in silence, disabling guard patrols with precise, non-lethal strikes that left the Veilith crews unconscious before they could raise an alarm. Then, Vice Admiral Chen's diversionary fleet dropped out of slipspace on the left flank and opened fire with everything they had. The Veilith responded exactly as Sarah had predicted. They shifted their reserves to meet the threat, weakening the center of their formation. And then Sarah gave the order. All whisper teams, detonate. Main fleet, full acceleration, weapons free. The fortresses went dark, their shields collapsed, their weapons fell silent. And through the sudden gap in the wall, 600 human warships came screaming out of slipspace with their guns blazing. The Ashenvale line, the unbreakable wall, the pride of the Valith Dominion, the greatest defensive structure in galactic history, fell in 19 hours. The Valith lost 1,400 ships, Earth lost 87, and the path to the enemy homeworld was wide open. On Vaelthar, Archon Draven received the news in his throne room and stood in silence for a very long time. His golden eyes stared at the tactical display, showing the shattered remains of his greatest defense. And for the first time in his life, the most powerful being in the Dominion felt a cold hand close around his heart. Fear. He buried it quickly, because fear was weakness, and he was the Archon. But it had been there, and his officers had seen it, and that was enough to crack something in the foundation of their loyalty. In his desperation, Draven made a decision that would define his legacy forever. He ordered the activation of the Oblivion Protocol, a planet-killing weapon hidden deep within Vaelthar's largest moon, capable of destabilizing a star and turning an entire solar system into a graveyard of fire and radiation. Admiral Talith Vor stood on the bridge of his flagship and heard the order, and something inside her broke. "Archon, I refuse," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled at her sides. "If we use that weapon, we become the very monsters the galaxy already believes us to be. And the humans will not stop. They will not negotiate. They will erase us from history." Draven looked at her with cold golden eyes. "You dare refuse a direct order?" "I dare to tell you the truth, which is more than anyone else in this room has the courage to do." Draven drew his sidearm and shot her through the chest. Talith Vor, the finest military mind the Valith had produced in a generation, the only officer who had truly understood the enemy they faced, collapsed to the deck. Her blood spread across the polished floor in a dark pool, and the bridge crew stared in horror. "Does anyone else wish to refuse?" Draven asked quietly. No one spoke. The remaining officers complied with the Oblivion Protocol, but their eyes were hollow, and their hands moved like the hands of the condemned. Within hours, several Valith commanders began secret communications with Earth, offering conditional surrender. As the human fleet approached Vaelthar, Sarah ordered something unprecedented, a galaxy-wide broadcast on every frequency, every channel, every communications network in known space. Every species, every world, every ship with a receiver would hear what she was about to say. She stood on the bridge of the Retribution. Behind her, through the massive viewport, the wreckage of the Ashenvale line drifted in the void, burning hulls and twisted metal spinning slowly against the stars. She wore her dress uniform, dark blue with silver trim, the flag of United Earth on her shoulder. Her face was calm, her back was straight, and her dark eyes held a fire that the camera carried across 1,000 light-years to 1,000,000,000 screens. She began by reading names. Not all 3,700,000, that would have taken years. But she read names for 4 straight minutes, without pausing, and each name was a person, a child, a parent, a friend, a lover, someone who had mattered, someone who had been alive and full of hope on a station that no longer existed. When she stopped, the silence was so deep that entire worlds held their breath. Then she spoke. "These were our people," she said. "Families, children, grandparents who wanted nothing more than to watch the stars from their windows. They were not soldiers. They were not warriors. They were the best of us, the ones we were supposed to protect." Her voice did not waver. It did not crack. It was steady and clear, and it carried the weight of a species' grief. "Your Archon burned them," she said. looking directly into the camera as if she could see Draven through it. He burned our children, and he laughed while they screamed. We did not start this war. We came to your Concord, and we begged for peace. We presented evidence. We asked for help, and we were ignored. We were mocked. We were told to sit down. She paused. Her jaw tightened. And when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something low and dangerous. Something that vibrated with a fury held so tightly under control that it was more terrifying than any explosion. So hear me now. Every Archon, every general, every species watching this broadcast across every corner of this galaxy, you ignited this war. Now face Earth's fury. She delivered her final warning with eyes that burned like dark stars, and then the broadcast ended. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the galaxy, dozens of species began evacuating from Valith allied space. 3 Valith vassal states surrendered unconditionally within the hour. 2 more followed before the day was over. The Dominion's alliance network collapsed like a house built on sand. The Battle of Vaelthar, the final battle, began the next morning. The Valith committed everything they had left: 1,800 warships, planetary defense grids, ground-based plasma batteries, and the Oblivion weapon buried in their moon. It was the largest concentration of military force the Dominion had ever assembled, and every ship, every soldier, every weapon was pointed at the approaching human fleet. Sarah brought 1,200 warships, reinforced by Relici engineering vessels and Orani intelligence frigates. She was outnumbered, but she had something the Valith did not: a fleet that had never lost an engagement, and a commander who had not slept more than 2 hours a night since the day her niece died. The battle raged for 3 days. The first day was brutal, a grinding, bloody slugfest where both sides traded devastating blows. Earth lost 200 ships, but destroyed 600 Valith vessels. The space around Vaelthar filled with wreckage and fire, and the silent screams of dying ships. On the second day, Whisper teams located the Oblivion weapon deep inside the moon's core. Sarah assembled a strike team, 40 of Earth's finest Marines, volunteers every one, who knew that this mission had almost no chance of survival. They launched in armored assault pods, punching through the moon's thin atmosphere and crashing into the surface under heavy fire. They fought through an entire garrison, thousands of Valith soldiers defending the weapon, losing Marines with every corridor, every chamber, every step closer to the core. On the third day, the strike team reached the Oblivion weapons control center. Only 11 Marines were still alive. Their leader, Major Daisuke Tanaka, looked at the weapon, a massive sphere of dark energy, humming with enough power to kill a star, and made his decision. He opened a channel to the Retribution. "Admiral, the weapon is too complex to disarm. We can overload it, but the detonation will take the moon with it." There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice came through, quiet and heavy with something that sounded like sorrow. "Understood, Major. The choice is yours." Tanaka looked at his 11 remaining Marines. They looked back at him with steady eyes, and not one of them hesitated. "It has been an honor, Admiral," he said. "The honor is mine," Sarah replied. "Earth will remember your names." Tanaka cut the channel, turned to his team and smiled. "Let us give them something to remember." They overloaded the weapon. The detonation split the moon in half, and the shockwave tore through space with the force of a collapsing star. It crippled the remaining Valith fleet, shattered their orbital defenses, and sent Draven's flagship spinning out of control. When the light faded, the war was over. Draven's flagship was surrounded. Boarding teams breached the hull and fought their way to the bridge. They found the Archon standing in the center of the ruined room, his golden eyes blazing with defiance. Sarah hailed him one final time. His face appeared on their screen, bloodied, battered, but still proud. "You think this ends anything?" he snarled. "Destroy me, and another will rise." Sarah looked at him, and there was no hatred in her eyes. only a vast, weary certainty. No, she said, they will not. Because every species in this galaxy just watched what happens when you touch our people. You are not a warning, Draven. You are the lesson. He was taken alive. Sarah insisted on it. Death is easy, she told her officers. He will live long enough to see everything he built unmade. The war ended, not with a scream, but with a silence. The same kind of silence that had spread across human space on the day Haven burned. Except this time, it carried something different inside it. Not grief, not rage, but a deep and exhausted relief, like the first breath after nearly drowning. The Valeth Dominion had fallen. Its fleets were ash and wreckage drifting in the void. Its Archon was in chains. Its conquered peoples were rising up across 100 worlds, tearing down the statues and banners of the Empire that had crushed them for centuries. And at the center of it all, humanity stood, battered, scarred, and grieving, but unbroken. The treaty negotiations took place on Tyrellis, the same neutral world where Sarah had been mocked, where Draven had told her to sit down, where the Galactic Concord had dismissed her warnings and turned its back while Haven burned. Sarah had chosen this location on purpose. She wanted every delegate in that chamber to remember what their silence had cost. She walked into the Great Hall wearing her dress uniform, and this time no one smiled at her condescendingly. No one whispered about the young species that still smelled of mud. Every eye in the room followed her with a mixture of awe and something close to reverence, because they had all watched the broadcasts. They had seen what humanity could do when it was pushed too far, and they would never forget it. The terms of the treaty were firm but measured, and they revealed something about humanity that surprised the galaxy almost as much as the war itself. The Valeth Dominion was dissolved, its political structure dismantled, its military permanently reduced to a defensive force. Every species that had been conquered or absorbed by the Dominion was granted full independence and sovereignty, with Earth guaranteeing their protection during the transition. Valeth war criminals would be tried before a joint tribunal composed of representatives from every affected species. The trials would be public, transparent, and fair, because Sarah insisted that justice without fairness was just revenge wearing a better mask. And as for the Valeth people themselves, the ordinary citizens who had not chosen this war, who had not ordered the burning of Haven, who had simply lived their lives under a government they could not control. They were not punished. Their worlds were not bombed. Their cities were not occupied. Their children were not made to pay for the sins of their leaders. When a Concord delegate expressed surprise at this mercy, Sarah looked at him with tired eyes and said something that was broadcast across the galaxy. "We are not them," she said. "We do not burn the innocent to punish the guilty. That is the difference between us, and it always will be." The chamber was quiet for a long time after that. Archon Draven Solcather was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment on a barren moon at the edge of known space. He would spend the rest of his days in a small cell, with a single window facing the stars he had once tried to conquer, watching recordings of Haven's destruction every day, the same footage that had played on every screen in human space on the worst day in their history. He would live, he would remember, and he would be forgotten. The Thyrolans, the urchin species that had warned the Concord about humanity and been ignored, formally apologized to Earth in a ceremony that was attended by representatives from over 200 worlds. Their ambassador, a being so old that she had watched civilizations rise and fall like seasons, stood before Sarah and bowed her great silver head. "We failed you," she said. "We saw the danger, and we did not act. We are ashamed." Sarah looked at her and offered something unexpected, a small, genuine smile. "You warned them," she said. "That is more than most did. We do not hold it against you." The Thyrolan raised her head, and there were tears on her ancient face. "Your species is remarkable," she whispered. You fight like demons, and forgive like saints. I do not think the galaxy has ever seen anything like you." "Good," Sarah replied quietly. "Then maybe the galaxy will think twice before making the same mistake again." In the months that followed, humanity did something that no conquering species in galactic history had ever done. They rebuilt what they had destroyed. Human engineers helped repair Valith infrastructure that had been damaged in the war. Human doctors established medical stations on liberated worlds. Human teachers opened schools where children of formerly conquered species could learn without fear for the first time in their lives. Earth formed the Sentinel Pact, a new alliance dedicated not to conquest or trade or political influence, but to a single, simple principle. No species would ever be left to face a predator alone again. The Relici were the first to join. The Urani followed. Then dozens of others, small species, vulnerable species, species that had spent centuries hiding in the shadows of larger empires, and had never dared to believe that anyone would protect them. A young Relici diplomat, the granddaughter of the elder who had wept when a human marine held her hand, visited Earth for the signing ceremony and asked Sarah a question that had haunted her species for generations. "Why do humans protect others?" she asked. "Your history is full of war and suffering. You have every reason to be cruel, to dominate, to take what you want by force. Why do you not?" Sarah looked at the young woman and thought about the question for a long time before answering. "Because we know what it feels like to suffer," she said. "We have hurt each other in ways that would make your nightmares seem gentle. We have committed horrors against our own kind that we will never fully atone for. And that is exactly why we protect others. Because we know what cruelty costs. And we decided a long time ago that knowing should mean something." The Relici diplomat stared at her. And in that moment, she understood something about humanity that no alien species had ever quite grasped before. They were not protectors because they were good. They were protectors because they had been terrible. And they had chosen to be better. That was what made them different. That was what made them frightening. That was what made them magnificent. On Mars, in the orbit where Haven Station had once circled the red planet, humanity built a memorial. Haven Eternal. It was a vast structure, beautiful and solemn, with walls of dark stone inscribed with the name of every person who had died. At its center was a garden open to space through a transparent dome, where trees and flowers grew in the starlight, and butterflies, real living butterflies bred from Earth's conservation programs, drifted among the blossoms in the artificial gravity. It was Sarah's idea, the butterflies. She never told anyone why, and no one ever asked. Years passed. The galaxy settled into a new era, not of peace exactly, because peace is never permanent, but of something better. A sense that someone was watching, that cruelty would not go unanswered, that the strong could not simply devour the weak without consequence. And at the center of that watchfulness stood Earth, not as a conqueror, not as an empire, but as a promise. Sarah retired from the military on a quiet Tuesday morning, with no ceremony and no fanfare. She had been offered every honor humanity could bestow: statues, titles, a seat on the governing council, her name on a dozen ships and 100 buildings, and she had declined them all. "The dead are the heroes," she said. "I am just the one who survived." She returned to Kenya, to a small house on the coast near Mombasa, where she had grown up listening to the waves and watching the sun set over the Indian Ocean. She planted a garden and adopted a dog, and learned to cook badly, and learned to sleep more than 2 hours a night. It took time. The nightmares did not stop easily. Some nights she woke up hearing the screams from Haven, and she would sit on her porch in the dark and breathe until the shaking stopped. But the nights grew quieter, and the mornings grew brighter, and slowly, so slowly, the fire inside her began to cool. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in gold and violet, a message arrived, a holographic letter forwarded through 6 relay stations from the far side of the galaxy. It was from a Relici child, a little girl who had been born on a free world because of what humanity had done. The letter was simple, written in the careful, unsteady hand of a child just learning to write in Galactic Standard. It said, "Thank you for saving us. My grandmother told me about the humans who came. She said you were very brave and also very kind. I drew you a picture." The picture showed a tall human soldier holding hands with a small Relici child. They were standing under a sky full of stars, and both of them were smiling. Sarah held the picture for a long time. Then she set it on her windowsill, next to a faded photograph of a 9-year-old girl with dark skin and bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. A girl who had loved butterflies and bad jokes and had once wanted to talk to a star. The sunset poured through the window and turned everything to gold. The picture, the photograph, and the face of a woman who had carried the weight of a war on her shoulders, and had somehow found her way back to something that felt like peace. She had carried the fire long enough. Now, at last, she let it become light.